Hello my friends, Drew from NICAP Mysteries here. Today I am excited to bring you the latest collaboration between myself and Lamont. We will be discussing two very well-known people within the UFO community in this video, and that is none other than Betty and Barney Hill. So without further ado, let's begin. Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple from the U.S. state of New Hampshire. While the Hills are widely regarded as being the very first humans to ever be abducted by E.T.s, there remains some debate over whether or not they truly were the first alien abductees in Earth's history. What's clear is that they were the first American couple to receive a lot of media attention over their 1961 abduction account. They were a brave and courageous couple whose lives were unfortunately steeped in controversy, which was no fault of their own. In addition to the controversy subsequent to going public with their abduction account, they were married at a time in our history where interracial marriages were very taboo, to say the least. Barney was a postal worker whose wife, Betty, was a social worker. They were both heavily involved in the civil rights movement as well. On the evening of September 19, 1961, they were driving back home to New Hampshire on U.S. Route 3 after vacationing in Quebec and Niagara Falls. At around 10:30 p.m., they observed a bright point of light in the sky, which they initially believed to be a shooting star. It quickly became apparent, however, that this was no ordinary meteor. The point of light began moving upwards erratically from below the moon and the planet Jupiter and across the moon in a northwesterly trajectory, while growing consistently bigger and brighter. At this point, Betty convinced Barney to pull over so they could take a better look at the odd spectacle. Barney parked at a rest area just south of Twin Mountain, and they both exited the car along with their dog, Delcy. Armed with a pair of binoculars, Betty was able to take a much clearer look at the bizarre object. She described what she saw as being an odd-shaped craft with flashing, multicolored lights traversing the face of the moon. She continued watching the object. She recalled that her sister claimed to have seen a flying saucer several years prior to that. Betty began to suspect that what she was watching might be something along the same lines as whatever her sister saw. She handed the binoculars to Barney, who was quite eager to take a closer look for himself. At first, Barney suspected the object to be a commercial plane en route to either Vermont or Montreal. Shortly after he began viewing the object through the binoculars, the object took a sudden and drastic change in its trajectory. It was now rapidly heading directly toward them. Now convinced that they were observing something truly unknown quickly approaching, the couple was gripped by an intense sense of fear. Feeling that their car would provide the best degree of protection against any possible threat posed by the descending object, they jumped back in and continued driving back to where they lived. As they drove away in their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, it became clear that the object was following them. They were about 1 mile south of Indian Head when the approaching craft made it to their position. It then rapidly descended toward their vehicle, causing Barney to slam on the brakes. At this point, the frightened couple were able to see the craft in great detail without binoculars. The massive object gradually rotated as it hung silently in the air directly above them. It was a classic disc-shaped flying saucer, which Barney described as looking like a huge metallic pancake. Betty estimated the diameter of the circular craft to be at least 60 feet, or 18 meters. It was so large that it spanned the entire field of view of their windshield. Barney was a highly intelligent, freedom-loving, patriotic supporter of the right to bear certain objects relating to self-defense. With his self-defense piece in his pocket, Barney stepped out of the car and cautiously approached the object. He was able to see multiple humanoid beings staring back at him through the craft's windows. One of the entities began communicating with him telepathically, instructing him to stay where he was and to keep his gaze locked onto the eyes of the entity. The self-defense piece he was carrying no longer provided him any sense of security in the situation. Terrified and fearing for his life, Barney quickly retreated back to the vehicle. In a state of sheer panic, the tires screeched as they attempted to escape. Now certain of the entity's intent to capture them, Barney instructed Betty to roll her window down and watch the object as it continued stalking them from above. Almost immediately after directing her gaze upward at the craft, they both heard a strange buzz and a rhythmic series of what was described as beeping sounds. The sounds were so intense, they could literally feel the car vibrating. They also reported feeling a tingling sensation throughout their bodies, followed by the onset of an altered state of consciousness. Dazed and confused, they were snapped out of their hypnotic-like trance by a second series of beeping and buzzing sounds, which brought them back to a fully conscious state. It was then that they realized they had somehow traveled nearly 35 miles, or 56 kilometers, in what seemed to be the blink of an eye. Even with a great deal of effort, they could only recall vague, hazy details about driving on that stretch of road. The most notable event they were able to remember was having to stop at a roadblock and observing a large, fiery orb in the middle of the road. The sun was just starting to come up by the time they got back home. Once back, they began taking note of a few other strange things for which they could not account. Both of their watches had stopped at the exact same time during their drive. Neither of their watches ever worked again. Barney's best pair of dress shoes were scuffed beyond repair. There were several tears in Betty's dress, as well as a pink powdery substance. The leather neck strap for the binoculars was torn, and they noticed a glossy pattern of concentric circles on their trunk, which had not been there prior to their ordeal. When a compass was placed over the circular pattern, the needle of the compass would spin wildly. 2 days later, Betty contacted Major Paul W. Henderson at Peace Air Force Base to report what little bit she was able to remember about the night in question. Major Henderson's report initially concluded that what the Hills had seen was nothing more than the unassuming planet Jupiter, which somehow made perfect sense to the Major. According to the Air Force Intelligence Information Record, Major Henderson's conclusion was revised 3 times after his initial conclusion that they had simply misidentified Jupiter, from an optical illusion to a temperature inversion, with the final conclusion being insufficient data. Major Henderson submitted his findings about the Hills case to the Air Force's official UFO research project, the now declassified Project Blue Book. Betty soon began researching the UFO phenomenon at her local library. She came across a book written by a retired Marine Major, Donald KEYHOE. Not only was Major KEYHOE a firm believer of the UFO phenomenon, he was also the head of the civilian UFO research organization, NICAP. Betty reached out to Major KEYHOE, who was eager to introduce the couple to other members of NICAP. The Hills were then interviewed by several NICAP members who deemed their story to be consistent and credible. During one of these interviews, Barney began to suspect that he had what he referred to as a mental block of some kind that prevented him from remembering more about the events that transpired that night. He further suspected that there may have been things about that night that he wouldn't want to remember even if he could. He had a vague notion that there was something very traumatic about the ordeal. He just couldn't recall specific details. Shortly after their ordeal, Betty began having vivid dreams about what transpired that night. She believed that certain elements of the dreams were subconscious memories of what she and Barney experienced during their span of missing time. The possibility of undergoing hypnosis was suggested as a means of potentially unlocking the mental block that had been imposed upon them. Though Barney was initially apprehensive, both of them eventually decided to undergo hypnosis. The multiple hypnotic regressions they each underwent yielded many interesting details about their encounter that they had not previously been able to recall. The sessions revealed a general description of the entity's appearance, undergoing a physical exam of some kind, telepathic conversations between the Hills and the entities, and many other strikingly consistent details which seemed to corroborate each other's account of what transpired that night. Among the most intriguing and notable details gleaned from the sessions was Betty's hand-drawn star map. During one session, she recalled asking the entities where they came from. They showed her an image of what appeared to be a constellation. The sessions enabled her to recall the image in such great detail that she was able to draw it on a piece of paper. The image was shown to numerous astronomers with the hope that one of them would be able to identify the constellation. Unfortunately, no one could. Skeptics and debunkers would use this as evidence that the Hills account was totally bogus until an unexpected discovery was made by a schoolteacher and amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish. Fish, who was fascinated by Betty's mysterious star map, came up with a simple theory of her own that she decided to test. Her hypothesis was simple. If an alien visitor was trying to explain where its homeworld was in relation to Earth, then it would make sense to include Earth's star, the Sun, somewhere on the star map. Working under this assumption, Miss Fish seems to have found the missing piece to the puzzle. If the star designated Sol represents our Sun, then Betty's star map becomes a nearly perfect match for the Zeta Reticuli system. Her theory was so intriguing to many mainstream astronomers that it was featured as the opening article in the December 1974 publication of Astronomy. While this article would prove to sway the minds of many former skeptics, not everyone was so convinced. Noted astronomers Carl Sagan and Stephen Soter believed the similarities between Betty's star map and Zeta Reticuli to be nothing more than a random alignment of chance points. In a 1980 episode of Cosmos, Sagan demonstrated, or attempted to demonstrate depending on your point of view, that the real-life map of Zeta Reticuli bore little resemblance to Betty's drawing if the lines in Betty's drawings were to be removed. On the other hand, a respected statistician named David Saunders came to a very different conclusion. Saunders, who was an integral part of the CONDON UFO study, argued that it was statistically improbable that Betty's map would line up so well with Zeta Reticuli by sheer coincidence. He calculated the odds of such a coincidence to be at least 1 in 1,000. On February 25, 1969, Barney's life was sadly cut short due to a cerebral hemorrhage. He was only 46 years old. Betty lived a long and full life, reaching the ripe old age of 85. After battling lung cancer, she passed away on October 23, 2004. I'd like to give a special thanks to Lamont for suggesting this topic. Lamont, it is always such a pleasure and an honor covering such important UFO cases with you. To my subscribers, if you haven't subscribed to his channel, please do so. You can find a link in the description. But now, back to the Hills. As we now visit their final resting place, may the Hills always be remembered for the courage and bravery they displayed in the face of adversity. Not only were they true pioneers in the civil rights movement, they served an integral role in bringing much-needed legitimacy to the field of UFO research. May their lives forever serve as a reminder to always keep an open heart and an open mind, and may they rest in peace.
And here we are at the Greenwood Cemetery here in Kingston, New Hampshire. And I am approaching now the grave of Betty and Barney Hill, the interrupted journey. Quite a fascinating story, to say the least. Those are Betty's parents right there, Raymond and Florence Barrett. And you can see in the back of their grave, their daughters' names are on the grave. Eunice Barrett, which would be, of course, Betty Hill. Her middle name, Elizabeth, short for Betty. Janet Miller might be the daughter, don't quote me. So her name was also emblazoned on the stone, but these are her parents. And you know, there was a time where this couple, they were the most famous couple in the whole country. Just this story was so absolutely wild. And let me tell you, as a little kid, my favorite television show, and to this day is still my favorite television show, that is, of course, Unsolved Mysteries. I never, ever forgot this story. And I always made it a point in my life to visit this grave if there was anything I do. And this was the most important grave for me to visit here on the East Coast. Just absolutely incredible. And I can't believe I am afforded the opportunity in my life to do these kinds of things. Whether you choose to believe or not to believe, that choice is always up to the person who's receiving any information. But I am a true believer. I believe the universe is way too big for us to just think in our own little insignificant narcissistic minds that we are the only people here on this planet, not on this planet, excuse me, but in this universe. And it's very small-minded to think so. And these two people got to experience, good or bad, depending on what your opinion is, something that most of us will never get to experience. So rest in peace to both Betty and Barney Hill and the Barretts. Okay, guys. Fascinating graveyard. I'll catch up with you on the next vlog.
Hey everyone, Drew here from Mad Cat Mysteries, and I hope you enjoyed the video you just watched. If you did, you can click on the subscribe button below. I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.